Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next segment of APAICS in Conversation. This week, we are featuring Honorable Judge Traci Hong, moderated by Jadu. Judge Hong, Judge Hong is a nationally recognized expert on immigration policy. Judge Hong most recently served as an immigration judge in the Department of Justice, and prior to that position, she served as a senior policy advisor for the Department of Homeland Security, Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Judge Hong also served as counsel for the U.S. House of Representatives, Committee on the Judiciary, Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, Refugees, Border Security, and International Law. She also served as the Immigration Program Director at the Asian American Justice Center and as a staff attorney for the American Immigration Council, and was in private practice in Dallas. Jadu is the director of PHS Watch and an adjunct professor at American University School of Law. Prior to that position, she actually served as chief counsel to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, as deputy assistant secretary of state for the Bureau of Legislative Affairs, as chief counsel of the Subcommittee on Immigration and Border Security in the U.S. House of Representatives, and as senior counsel for Representative Civil Law. With that, I pass it on to Ur.
Thank you, Anthony. I'm really so honored to be here to interview Traci. We've known each other for almost 2 decades now. And in a certain sense, Traci and I grew up together in terms of our professional careers in immigration law and policy. And I really thank you for inviting me to do this. Another thing that Traci and I have in common is our personal connections to the immigration story that is really the story, the nation's story on immigration. Traci, just to ask you your first question. You immigrated to the United States as a child from Korea. I'm the daughter of 2 immigrants from different countries and backgrounds. My mom from Mexico, my dad from across the world, Iraq. In a certain sense, just between your own immigration journey and those of my parents, we could probably write a story that would exemplify the power and beauty of our nation's immigration system and really the need to keep it robust and strong, which relates to my first question for you. Why do you think it's so important to have people with our lived experiences involved in immigration law and policy in the way that you have throughout your career?
So, or first of all, before I answer the excellent and immediately difficult question, thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this interview, or what I really actually hope is more of a conversation between 2 very good, frankly, personal and professional friends, because I think that people could hopefully get a lot from the way that, as you put it so beautifully, we grew up together professionally and personally. So first of all, thank you for participating in this event with me. Then to turn to answer your first question, I think that it is so very important, especially in a complex issue and policy like immigration, to have those of us who are either immigrants themselves or the children of immigrants, because it really gives us a visceral understanding of how immigration law and policies actually affect people in the real world. And I think that's really important from the making of really good policy, because it gives us a clearer sense of when a particular provision of law works or doesn't work, or a particular policy, because we have a very firsthand sense of what people do under these circumstances, which can be often very challenging, as we know from our own life experience. And I think it makes us better lawyers, it makes us better policymakers. I know that was very much my sense, again, both professionally and personally, as you and I have worked together through the years, but I wonder if you can maybe add a little bit to that as well, based on your experience. Or I think you're on mute.
If it would help if I knew how to use technology.
So, none of us do these days.
Yeah, I think you're so right, Traci. You know, I have always thought that, great law and policy could be made and is really often made without people who have sort of related lived experiences. But it's so critical to hear those voices because yes, it is possible and good policy has been made. We've seen much of it, not just in immigration, but elsewhere, even when people who aren't affected have not been a part of it. So yes, it's possible to listen, to learn, to make good policy on, for example, healthcare, even if you've never feared losing or being without health insurance. But it's highly more likely that you will make even better policy and you will accomplish your policy goals if you at least include people in that policy making table who have lived that experience. They can tell you the obstacles they experienced and the issues that they faced that a person who hasn't been through wouldn't be able to fundamentally understand that. So yes, everybody should be included and not just heard, but included at the table of policymaking. The same is true in immigration policy. And I think the same is true in all areas of our law and policy throughout government. So I totally agree with you, Traci. I think that is what is so important for people with our different immigration stories to be at the table and participate.
But or this is exactly one of the reasons why I asked you to participate with me in this conversation, because you actually brought out the next point that I wanted to make, which is it's just having a lived experience is just really one part of a very complex process of making law and making policy. And that, those of us who do have such personal connections also have to be very cognizant of the fact that that it's impossible for each one of us to embody the very complex experiences in something as different and specific to each individual as immigration. So at the same time, we have to manage and balance our personal experiences and have a little bit of humility about the fact that whatever we bring to the table, it's certainly not, it can't possibly cover the panoply of different experiences that people have, right, about immigration. That's right. And that really has to be also balanced with an open-mindedness, which you described so well, about being willing to listen and learn from people with all kinds of experience or no direct experience at all. And that balance is really what makes a good policy person. So I'm so glad that you raised that.
Yeah, I mean, diversity that's what this is about. It's about including voices at the table. It's about, and all voices, not just one and not just another, but trying to bring as many voices into the conversation and into the discussion, and ultimately the product that is produced that becomes the law and policy of our country.
Well put.
Yeah. So, well, I also want to go to a little bit more personally. You recall we were on the Hill. Gosh, we were in the 2000s. Let's put it that way. So now I don't know what to call those, but there weren't a lot of people of color. There weren't a lot of women on the Hill, for that matter, and not just the Hill, but also the executive branch, where eventually both you and I went. How much do you think that has changed? Have you seen it? Have you seen a pronounceable change? And not just that, but what does it take to make, even if you have seen some change, how to continue that change? And why is that so important?
So, sorry, everybody. If you keep seeing my hand, it's because I'm trying to cut out the noise as much as possible so that you could concentrate on what each of us are saying. So sorry for that. Technology is a challenge this day and age. Anyway, to go back to trying to answer Orr's excellent questions. They're all kind of hard. I'll start with the positive part, which I think is that, yes, I have noticed a change. Gosh, let's admit it, or it's been about 20 years since you and I have been working together on these issues. And I am very pleased to note that there are more people of color, more women of color, which personally makes me very happy. And I do think, kind of like what we started out talking about, very much the missing piece in what is and should be a puzzle of how to do policymaking, again, especially on something as complicated as immigration, was that piece when you and I started in the early 2000s, right? Is the people, the voice that we're missing were oftentimes the voices of the people or the children who are most directly affected by the policies that we were all trying to make, which is that of the immigrants themselves or children of immigrant, US citizen children of immigrants who would also be affected by those policies. So I know that you and I did our best or to try to address that. And I am really, really happy to see that there has been substantial change, although, you know, it's an ongoing progress, right? Which is, one of the really best experiences I remember that you and I worked on together was in 2010 when sort of at the tail end of that term, the House finally actually became the first, it was the first time that either house in Congress had passed the DREAM Act as a standalone bill. And you and I were lucky enough to really participate in that. And unfortunately, obviously, the bill ultimately failed in the Senate, but the experiences that we all went through together, both for those of us who are working on it professionally, like you and I did, but more importantly, so many of the leaders that I see now who are working on immigration 10 years later were the people that you and I saw as students who came to talk with us and tell us about their experiences and were lobbying. They are now leading the movement. Yes, and that's been such I've just been so grateful to see their direct participation and just to see how, quite frankly, they're ruling the world. And I think it's really enriched the policy discussion and really sort of plug that hole that you and I try to plug in our early days of making sure that there are strong voices at the table who can talk about their lived experience. So I've been really, really happy about that. But I also want to turn the question back to you, though, because you've also been to some very different places, right? So after the Hill, you wound up going to the State Department, and then you were the chief counsel at USCIS. And so I want you to maybe tell us a little bit about your experience in the executive branch and how you felt about the the increase in diverse voices or the lack thereof.
Yeah, and we have a question from the audience that's related.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so what are some of the differences in the work that you did among the various branches of government? So
good question, audience.
Telepathy with the audience. even in this virtual environment, we still feel each other.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, and Traci, we should just talk about how there are, and I don't think this is unique to immigration, but there are many ways on immigration. We have a personal connection. We've been in it for so long. There are many ways to be a part of immigration law and policy. You can do that from the Congress, which you saw Traci do, which I did some of, and well, actually a decade of it. And then there's also the executive branch, and within the executive branch, there is so much to do inside the executive branch. From most people think immigration, DHS. Within DHS, there's USCIS, the Immigration Service. There's the Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE. There's CBP, Customs and Border Protection. But even within DHS, Traci, you should talk about where you lived when you went to. When you were at DHS. And then, I spent some time at the State Department. They too had huge authority over the immigration law with regard to people outside the country. And they also are big players in the refugee system. But even stepping outside of that, you have HHS, the Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement, which handles refugee resettlement along with the unaccompanied children. And then even stepping from there too, you can think about the Department of Justice with all the cases that have been filed by so many. And so there are just a lot of executive branch things, but then there's the outside advocacy and the role that advocacy plays in shaping immigration law and policy, not just in the Congress, but in the administration and the executive branch. And so, I've been in all of those in some way, and boy, does it provide you a full understanding of the picture of how immigration law and policy is made and how best to make it. And Traci, I'd love to hear your perspective because you've had a similar, different, you actually have private practice, which you should talk about too, because there's also private practice representing people individually.
So, audience, thank you so much for that great question, because we were actually, that was something that Ur and I both really wanted to highlight. I have this kind of a line about how immigration is a little bit like an elephant, right? And depending on, even though it's the same issue, depending on how you approach it, whether you're representing individuals when you're in private practice, or whether you're trying to make, if you're trying to change the system as a whole, either as an advocate or as Ur and I certainly tried to do for a significant part of our career, if you're trying to change the system from the inside, whether as a staffer on the Hill or whether you're working in the executive branch. And I think between Ur and I, we've now hit, I guess one of us has to go to HHS at some point, because otherwise we've hit DHS, DOJ, and the State Department. And it's really fascinating because no matter where I'm at, and I've been working on immigration now for a quarter of a century, but depending on where you are and how you're trying to address those issues, it's always a little bit different, hence the line about the elephant, right? So depending on what part you're touching and what you're trying to change and what you're trying to accomplish, the things that you do and how you do it is very, very different. So, being an immigration judge or representing individuals, to me anyway, was particularly gratifying because you get to see the difference that you make immediately, right? Because they're right in front of you, and you are going to make, or you're either going to help the people, or you have the responsibility to make a really, really important decision about the person that's right in front of you. And that I've always found to be one of the really challenging and yet gratifying ways to deal with and live with immigration.
And related to this question, we just got another question from the audience. Do you have advice for those wishing to decide whether they should pursue private practice versus public service? You started in private practice and moved from there. What would be your advice?
I'm kind of looking forward to listening to your answer to that question. So listen, if you learned nothing from our conversation today, take it from me, someone who has done really absolutely everything, I think I can say. I used to joke or heard me say this many times that I have a career ADD, and I like being challenged. I mean, I've always loved immigration. I've never wanted to do anything else, but within that, I have not been shy about trying to do different things to solve what I saw were really important problems that affected our country and the people that I love. So, you know what? Don't worry so much about where you start, because wherever it is you start, if you care about what you're doing and if you love what you do and if you want to make a difference, then the next thing will kind of open up, whatever it is. That's anyway very much been my experience. But I want to hear from you. Yeah, I need some career advice.
I also know, I remember your story of how you were in private practice and the 1996 law. So this is so important.
Thank you for telling my story. No, that's wonderful.
I mean, it's important to see like what motivated people to get into law and policy, not doing, there's private practice, and then what is a career change? And I love that story because it talks about what motivated you, and I think what motivates a lot of people. You're working in your day-to-day life as a practitioner, and you're seeing things, and you're feeling frustrated, or even if you're not a practitioner, you're looking around the world and you're saying, that's not right. That's not right. I know I could do better than that. I got to figure out how to fix this. So tell that story, because it's a good one. I mean, you were a young attorney. I mean, you were pretty fresh out of law school, it's like, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my life. So
yeah.
No,
thank you. Now, see, everybody, now you could tell why I asked Or to interview me for this, because she's the perfect wing person. All right, so here, this is, and she remembers my stories. So one of the reasons why, well, actually, I'll start from the beginning. I graduated law school in 1995. As some of you who are students of immigration history might know, there were some very bad changes to the immigration laws in 1996 in two legislations, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, and then just 6 months later, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, called IRA. These two pieces of legislation dramatically changed our immigration laws, and they wrecked the lives of thousands of people. So by that point, I had been practicing law for, just about a year. Finally, stopped being a little scared all the time. I'm like, okay, I'm getting it. And then the law changed. And instead of being able to help the people who are coming to see me and other attorneys in my firm, I was having to tell people virtually every day, people who've been in the United States longer than I'd been alive by that point, that I couldn't help them. And it was the most awful, frustrating feeling. And so I started really learning the law, not just to practice law, but to really see, what can I do? What can I do to make these people's lives a little bit better, even under these difficult circumstances? And so I was able to get into some very, very cutting edge litigation. And that's, to make a very long story short, that's what got me out of practicing law as a job and doing this as a passion, which I hope really comes across. So to whoever the brilliant person was that asked the question, actually both the questions that Laura and I have been answering so far. You know what, especially when you're young and just starting out, don't worry so much about where it is you start. Just get involved, especially if there's an issue that speaks to you, as what happened in 1996 spoke to me personally. Because if you truly care about the issue and if you really want to make a difference, it doesn't really matter how you start, because you will find a way. If one way doesn't work, then you'll go to a different way, just like I did. You started out in private practice, and gosh, you are making a difference, don't get me wrong, and it was really wonderful. But if you feel like, no, I want to make a bigger difference, then you do whatever comes next to you. For me, it was moving to Washington, D.C. and doing impact litigation. And if that still doesn't feel like it's enough, then that's fine. Then you'll go work for the Asian American Justice Center, because as you know, our community, which is 2/3 foreign born, is so dramatically impacted by immigration policies. And that just made me care about this issue even more. And then if you're lucky enough to have good friends like Or, they'll talk you into coming inside. You'll make more of a difference on the inside, and that'll get you to the next step. So I think what's really important is that you find something that you really, really care about, and then the career path will, at least in my experience, and I think Or's too, will work itself out.
It reveals itself magically. It really
much better put. I like that. It will reveal itself.
Yeah. And the direct impact that you have as a private practitioner obviously is very rewarding. You're working very directly with an individual. But I will say, even on the Hill, when we were on the Hill, cases were brought to us, right? And, they, again, talking about lived experience, here you are, cases were brought before you, meet the people, you talk to the people as they were going through whatever issue it was that literally is the policy you're thinking about and how you can better affect it. And it's just, again, how important it is to have real life cases in yourself and listening to others. So it's everywhere too. You won't lose that personal connection. It's available, it's there. And again, the more you continue to try to hold on to those real life cases, those real life experiences, I think the better policymaker you are. And I'm not saying everybody has to live an experience to be a good policy. That's not true. We can all do good policy. Be empathetic individuals, obviously, that's very possible, but it's obviously a lot easier when, it's right in front of you and with you. But there's another question from the audience. Thank you. A lot of questions are coming. So Traci, as an Asian American woman, were there any barriers for you in getting to the Executive Office of Immigration Review as an immigration judge? What did you experience? What were the obstacles and how did you overcome them?
Okay, we clearly have a really fantastic audience because all of your questions are just right on. Here's a good example of, so I got on the bench in 2013. And to the best of my knowledge, and it's telling that I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure I was the first Korean American immigration judge. That was 2013. And we don't know because I don't think EOR keeps statistics.
Yeah.
So that's just my understanding because the immigration judge corps was relatively small at the time. So I knew most of my colleagues. And, I think that was their understanding and mine as well. But gosh, isn't it kind of shocking that it took until 2013 for them to have a judge of a Korean American background? And so once you get on the bench, and again, when I get done with this, I'm going to turn it over to Org because she's held some really high-level positions in the executive branch, actually on the Hill and on the executive branch. And I think we've talked before, quite frankly, between she and I, about the challenges of what it's like to be a woman and a young woman, well, we were young at the time, young women and women of color holding positions of authority. And honestly, I would be lying if I did not tell you, especially on the bench as a judge, that I really felt like I was treated differently than some of my colleagues who were older and male and white. And that I felt held to a much higher standard isn't quite right, but we talked a lot about this in the context of the presidential election of what kind of additional challenges there are when a woman runs for the president or vice president, when that woman is of a different background. So if you're a person of color, that you have to worry, quite frankly, a lot more about, am I coming across as likable? Am I coming across as too angry? Am I this or am I that? And do people respect the authority, not because of me, but because of the position that I hold? I don't know if you've ever been to immigration court, the audience member who asked a question, but there behind every immigration judge is a huge seal of the Department of Justice, which is where the immigration courts are located. And I always used to tell folks, this isn't about me. This is about the fact that the United States government trusted me to make an important decision about people's lives. And that's what matters. And that I'm acting I'm trying my very best to do what I think is right under our laws, because that's the trust that my country placed in me. But were there challenges that I think I might, or is there a suspicion on my end that I think it might have been a bit easier for me if I was not a woman and not a person of color and not, again, at least at that time, relatively young looking? Yeah, I do. But, or can I kick that over to you to maybe have you talk about a little bit of your experience?
I mean, it kind of goes back to our first question, the first discussion, frankly, is why, related to why is it so important to have women of color or just anybody that isn't the norm in a position, and the obstacles of getting there, of course, because no one's used to seeing you there. And then there's also just the sort of human nature, this sort of like threat. Why is this changing? Oh my gosh, there's change. I'm not sure about this. And even good-hearted people will feel like something's different here. And you're that different thing. You're the thing that has shown up that's different. And we all recognize how important that is, but if something's been functioning in the same way over and over and over in the same way with the same group and the same people, it's hard for that system to have a new idea and a new thought and a new, I mean, frankly, a new look. So you're walking in with this, like, it's almost like you're walking as a completely different thing that is not accepted yet. So there's always, there is that. And that's what being the first and being, sort of the leader in that is, it's hard. And it gets to the sort of final question about what does it mean to be a resilient person and a resilient leader? And it's just, this is why it shouldn't be this way. So it's so important to have diversity so that the generation coming up just behind us is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go do that. That's not a problem. And it's much easier. And it is the norm. And they don't have to experience this difficulty, these obstacles. And it should just be, I would like to do this in my career. It sounds like something I'm really good at. I have the education and the experience and the skills, and I'm excited about it. And that's what the question should be, instead of, oh, great, well, now I have an obstacle because, boy, I'm a woman of color, or anybody else that isn't the norm, having to figure out how to navigate through that. So I'm going to turn the table back to you again, Traci, because it does get to that sort of final question about that. I think, what is a resilient leader, especially a woman of color that you are in that environment?
And you, my friend. So, we touched on this actually throughout the conversation, but just to make it explicit, I think the point of being a resilient leader, being a resilient person, quite frankly, is don't give up, right? So we talked a little bit about this in the context of all my career changes. If there's a cause or issue or something that you care about, that you think that you could make a difference, don't let things like your gender, don't let things like your ethnicity be a deterrence. And I'm not saying that, Ora and I both talked about the fact that, yes, does it sometimes make it more difficult? It does. Can it also be a tremendous plus? That's also true. And I think what makes a person and a leader resilient is the same exact quality, which is, you know what, if one door shuts, go open another door, try something different. If you want to solve a problem and the way to do it isn't representing somebody directly, if it isn't litigation, if it isn't advocacy, if it isn't going to work with the government, if it isn't going on the bench, you know what, there's always another way to tackle it, as long as you love what you're doing and you want to make a difference.
And Traci, I love that point you made, where there are obstacles, don't give up, find another door. I also love that you said, and it's not always an obstacle. It's not all, sometimes having the new idea is the thing. And, you know, people could be stuck in their world, same old, same old, same old. You walk in, you're the new thing, you're the new idea. And it's the thing that works. So that's the positive side of this. Of course, there are obstacles, and don't give up. Absolutely, Traci, that's just right. And just having that right mix of being aware, but also being optimistic for the future.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end this conversation. Let's go on at the top, Anthony. What do you think?
You both, first off, thank you so much for participating in this conversation. I really enjoyed the back and forth between you two. And I really think that and Judge Hong, you truly epitomize what it means to be a resilient leader, especially both being women of color. You know, this is paving the pathway, you know, and expanding that AAPI pipeline. So I really want to thank you both, especially fighting for representation, which I think is really important, especially at the highest levels of government. So I can't thank you enough for participating in this APAICS in Conversation. Next week, we'll be featuring another woman of color, the professor of lawyering skills at, Seattle University School of Law, Lorraine K. Benai. She's also the director of the Fred T. Korematsu Center for Law and Equality. So we will be joined by her next Thursday, October 29th at 12:30 p.m. So please sign up at apaics.org, RSVP right there, and we'll see you next Thursday. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Traci. That was great.
Likewise. It was wonderful. Bye.